Thanks for joining me on About Alberta Tech, which is focused on introducing Alberta tech companies to Albertans. Our goal is to share the innovation and diversity that exists in this province in quick bites. My name is Lenora Thomas, and today I'm joined by Wayne Karpoff, President and CEO at Willowglen Systems. Thanks for joining me.
I'm pleased to be here.
So let's start with some background on you. How did you get into tech?
A little bit by accident. So my degrees are in computing science, so I'm a geek, and worked in the university environment for a while, but got sucked into a really exciting startup called Mirius, which was Canada's entry to the supercomputing race. Joined it a little while into its career, and then bubbled up to eventually become CEO of that. And once I was on that side of the fence, never looked back. So I've been doing, high growth, swing for the fence kind of companies all my career. So. Oh,
that's fantastic. I had checked that out on LinkedIn, and I didn't realize that we were in the supercomputer race. So that's bad on me, I think.
Yeah, well, that was in the 80s. The epilogue of Mirius was we were one of a dozen companies that were all doing stupidly heroic engineering, competing with companies like Intel, to build a new generation of supercomputers based on this new trend called microprocessors. I just dated myself a little bit there. And so we were one of a dozen companies all chasing a total market cap at that time of 300 million. So the moment was, if you're going to do a heavy R&D company, make sure that the market cap you're chasing is huge. It did become huge after, using Jeffrey Moore's perspective, the chasm crosser was IBM coming into the market with their SB series of computers. And then the US government, having been embarrassed by the Japanese in the supercomputing market, launched something called the ASCII program to accelerate supercomputing and dumped billions and billions of dollars into companies like ours to accelerate the growth of supercomputing. But Mirius was ahead of that curve. So we were just, great engineering, but just a little bit too early. So.
Oh, that's amazing. Okay, so now you're with Willowglen Systems. So what does Willowglen Systems do?
So Willowglen Systems does technology in the industrial automation space, but to be specific, we're kind of like the brains and nervous system for heavy industrial products like, metro systems and power grids and pipelines and things like that. Our forte is distributed mission critical industrial architecture. And so we build technologies that, basically make that go and make that work. So, for example, in the metro space, we control currently, we safely deliver about 4 billion passengers per year around the world. We're now deployed on 5 continents with the things we do. We control the energy supply for the country of Singapore, things like that. So. Oh,
wow. Not tiny at all.
Well, it's interesting, but it fits, my last company was a company called Yada Yada, and I went into that. That was a storage company, and I went into that with the notion of, it's an industry that had been stagnant for 2 decades, and so you go in and say, well, I want to go do a startup in storage, and say, well, oh, that's boring. But when industries like this have been kind of flatlined in innovation for extended periods, and then there's an inflection in the market to create new demand and a new sense of urgency, it creates these great opportunities for companies like ours. So in our case, industrial automation has been pretty much flatlined in terms of innovation for decades. Along comes things like the financial crisis, environmental crisis, environmental stewardship crisis, general need for better utilization of assets and things like that. And it creates these massive opportunities for companies like us to come in and compete with literally some of the largest companies in the world. And that's another interesting property of the companies I've done. They've all competed against these large multinational companies, and you kind of get this kink in your neck looking up at them. But this is where innovation comes from, is companies like us that can see an opportunity before end customers do, can step into those and outmaneuver the large companies and create those innovative products. So my last company, Yada Yada, now in the hands of Dell EMC. So they're on 104th Street. You'll see a Dell EMC building. So that product, now is a key crown in a large company that drives a lot of their sales there. So, and we don't, so those are the opportunities. So we can play that game in Alberta. And we've done it multiple times now. We did that with Mirius, we did it with Yada Yada, now we're doing that with Willowglen.
That's fantastic. And how did Willowglen get started?
So long before I was there, Willowglen's actually coming up on being a 50-year-old company, believe it or not. And so there was, a bright engineer that found some hard problems to be solved by, in this case, the oil and gas space, and that was the legacy of Willowglen. But it did not achieve what it should have in terms of the technology it was creating. Very typical Alberta company where great technology, some religiously happy customers, but sales and marketing is waiting for the phone to ring, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And not really realizing how to grow that technology base and something that scales and things like that. And so my mission, what happened is when Yada Yada sold, the owner at the time was an angel investor 4 companies ago and called in a favor. And I told him, well, I'll give you 2 years because you took this leap of faith on this young whippersnapper, but no more than 3. And it's now been 10 years, and along the way, kind of bought the company, kind of thing. So, so it's been a great adventure, and it has the footprints of things that I really, really like. I love companies that can say we're here to change the world, and Willowglen really has that potential to do that, especially in this time where we must do a better job with environmental stewardship, and we must do a better job with better utilizing the assets that we have. We need, for example, a better user experience on the metro systems we run so that we can increase the adoption. Those kinds of things are stuff that when you're the brains and the nervous system of those infrastructures, you have the opportunity for doing a lot of very interesting things.
That is so cool. And so what are you growing towards with Willowglen then?
Well, yeah, there's always this billion-dollar square that stares you in the face, and but it seems again both well, Yada Yada achieved the billion-dollar square in terms of its product. We can build billion-dollar company products here in Alberta, and that's happened before, and we intend to happen again. And so where we're going with this right now is Willowglen has gone through a multi-phase quest, which started with building automation so you break down all the islands of control into a single brain that does the whole thing. So, the analogy that I would use is picture a dancer or something where, every part of their body had a different brain and you had to synchronize them all together. And if you practice lots, that works really well, but it's really hard to optimize on that. And certainly it doesn't do very well if something unexpected happens. You fall on your face. So first step on that was to build an automation system that's large enough that you control everything from a single brain. So for example, we control Suncor's entire North America pipeline network from a single control room in Sherwood Park, as opposed to each pipeline having their own control room sort of space, or the metro systems. We just launched the Ottawa metro system. On that, what's interesting about it is instead of having one control system for the power and one for the passenger information system and one for, we control everything. And so the first step on doing that is to consolidate all the controls into one brain. And that allows you now to optimize across it. The second part that we're moving towards is today, adding a data point on one of these mission critical spaces is stupidly expensive. Hundreds of thousands of dollars to add a single pressure sensor on a pipeline is kind of typical. So, and the problem then is, we can grow the brain, but if you only have those limited inputs, and it's so hard to do that, the analysis that you can do is limited. So the second step on this is to take very heavily industrialized IoT, with heavy cybersecurity and all the other things that go, because we do mission critical things, and make it as easy to add a device onto a pipeline or a power grid or a building that's supporting things as it is to add a doorbell on your Wi-Fi network at home.
You would think it should be that easy.
It's not, and and that's so. The next step along that is we have to put it somewhere. So our world has this operational firewall around it, and so we can't use put it in the cloud as an approach.
Yeah.
And so we have to build the equivalent of these large cloud-based systems within that operational firewall. And for us, the analysis has to allow for real-time analysis of all that data, because it's these really rapid decisions that goes with it that will allow these monumental improvements on things. And then the next step along that is we need to help them build a better brain. So this is where we're using some of Alberta's strength, which is in the machine learning space, to provide operator assistance and real-time analytics to now better data, real-time access to that data, real-time decision support in driving all those pieces. And then wrapping that around all the regulatory things and stuff that we have to do to work in the SCADA market, because one of the other challenges we have is for us, it's not this new greenfield out there. We have to bridge decades of infrastructure into this new world. And so putting all that together means that we can start to generate just really hugely disruptive value propositions in utilization, environmental stewardship, in capital asset utilization, safety, reliability, things like that, that really change the world in doing that. And then, we couple that with, we have the capability of building very high safety standards as well in systems. So we have sole source contracts with Bombardier and the Chinese, for example, for building technologies that raise the safety standards of metro trains up to the same as a nuclear reactor. So we make sure, for example, a Bombardier Inovia train has no more than one safety critical failures every 1,000 centuries, in the space we're doing. So the stuff we do requires us to be very, very high availability, high safety, high things like that, but bringing in all these transitive technologies into that operational firewall all at the same time.
You're really bringing everything together in that one brain. Wow. And I'm actually kind of shocked. I had no idea that is how far your software or your solution went, really. What else do you think the community... Sorry.
Well, as I say, that is a typical problem where, and which is why I'm so pleased you're doing these podcasts. There are so many great stories out there, but, here's a little company that nobody's heard of before that's deployed on 5 continents, that has sole source contracts with some of the largest companies in the world, that's, swinging for a fence in a world that needs these huge improvements in environmental stewardship and efficiency and things like that, all put together. And so, yeah, it's we need to do as a province a much better job of telling that story.
We do. I 100% agree with you on that. And that said, what else do you think the community should know about you and about Willow Glen?
Well, so as a community, we take on some very hard problems in some industries that need that. And so it's kind of neat because we talk about diversification in the province as being something that's separate and aside. Well, frankly, a strong technology base in a province is needed, not only because we as Willow Glen are going to become great exporters of that technology, but our traditional industries need strong bases of technology so that they can transition, so that they can be better environmental players, so that they can compete in the current economics. And it's not just the oil patch. It's even companies like the construction companies and things like that have been fairly static in the innovation for long periods of time. The current economic circumstances that says, if I could wave a wand and solve this problem, boy, I could be a much more competitive product. Well, the technology sector represents the wand. We just need to send them to wizard training school and kind of educate them on how to wave that wand and how to work with our sector. And everybody wins if we do that. The startups win because they're using these companies as their early adopters. And what's more is if it's done properly, those companies will mentor them on what the broader community needs as opposed to that one customer on that. They also have an early reference site on that, and we go on that. The big companies win because we've accelerated development and things that make them more competitive. And what's more is we build this bridge where that innovation is a sustained effort, not a one-time procurement kind of an exercise. Of course, the universities benefit because then we have reasons for keeping our highly educated people here. The University of Alberta is 34th of public institutions in the world. We have great people, but they need interesting places to work and to do those sorts of things. And then of course that gives us that diversification that's sustainable, where we'll bridge our current industries and then take those into other industries such as health. By the way, Alberta should lead the planet on healthcare technologies right now, because of all the building blocks that we have. And oddly enough, it's kind of like, NASA, the mission for NASA was to put a man on the moon, and out of that came things like microwave technologies and things like that. We need to look at the oil and gas sector as a technology starting point that will allow us to transition and diversify because of that, and leverage what we have in our backyard to create the companies that we are.
I can't even say anything close to that. That is amazing. That is exactly it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, again, I would like to applaud you for doing your sector, because one of the things Alberta companies don't do very well is tell our story a little bit. We don't, if you walk down Jasper Avenue and ask a skill testing question, what's the third largest driver of Alberta's GDP right now? Well, they pull on their beard if they're old like me, and they say, well, one's oil and gas. Got that one.
Yeah.
2 is agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
3 is knowledge-based industries. And most people would jump to maybe mining, I don't know, tourism, sort of things. Knowledge-based industries. We have some of the most prolific engineering universities in the world here. We have numerous centers of excellence here that we're growing on. Your company is a great example of, you're in your day job that's, leveraging that base of technology. We need to take those into other industries. We need to run with that to create to create a technology sector that runs on that. The other part I would say is right now, more than ever, the community does need to step out of its basement, even though I have my headphones and I'm talking to you from my basement. Step out of our basement and and be known and tell these stories, because the world here needs to know that we exist. We need to tell that story. It's interesting. So one of the roles I have is I chair Tech Edmonton right now. I sit on a lot of boards like that, and a lot of university boards and things like that. And as we look at retooling those organizations for the next future on that, we say, well, how do we create more startups? And so we start saying, well, gee, let's create 50 or 100 startups, or these that feels really good. But the GDP of the Alberta is $338 billion last year. And so if we're going to do this seriously, we have to look at the whole ecosystem as a startup, Jeffrey Moore style startup system, where currently we're dealing with early adopters of things in the things that we do. So we'll create a company and we'll wrap a Tech Edmonton around the company to make sure it works, and we'll spit it out the door and we'll create them one at a time. How do we do that in scale? So we need to be able to achieve some pretty aggressive results on that. In particular, working backwards, we need to have like 100 to 500 companies that cross that $100 million line to do that. In order to do that, to get 100 companies over the $100 million line, you need probably on the order of 1,000 companies that hit that $20 to $50 million line. In order to do that, assuming that we have a success rate of companies that are past the inception point into that, I have some initial customer traction and investment traction into, I hit that $2 to $3 million space. I need to first improve our hit rate on that from arguably somewhere around 1 in 15, it seems to be where we are right now, to maybe 1 in 5. So we have to increase the success ratio on that. But then I have to create 5,000 startups, not 500, not 100, 5,000 startups to hit that math. You say, well, that's an insane number. How would we do that? And there's lots of daunting things in that. So, for example, 5,000 startups at say $500,000 worth of seed money each says I need $2.5 billion worth of seed level financing. And you've got AEC at 150 million right now. You say, well, how the heck are we going to do that? And you say, well, wait a minute. 1 year, this is a 2017 number, 1 year RSP contribution for the province of Alberta was $5.8 billion. 1 year's RSP contribution, which says that there's a ton of latent amount of investment floating around that can be leveraged. And this comes full circle back to where we started. We have to tell the story so that people will look at tech sector as something that they don't even know exists, but is something that, and we have to do all the same startup sorts of things, remove the barriers to investment, create an awareness, create a theme on it, create a metaphor, all those things that we as entrepreneurs learn how to do to create companies. We have to do it as a complete ecosystem. And then we can tap some of those latent pieces of things on that. We need to capture the imagination of people that are going through school right now and saying, I want to be an entrepreneur in the tech sector. Do you know the high school dropout rate in Alberta is nearly 1 in 4?
Right.
That's right. So, versus when I came out of high school, now I am dating myself, 62% of Albertans had some exposure to post-secondary education. And it's because we've gone through 2 decades of it's too easy to get a job. And therefore, we've lost the imagination of our youth in terms of a purpose and a career path to go. So we have to tell these stories and get them out there into the community to make sure that people are known. And so, again, I applaud you for doing the podcast, because we need to be able to do those sorts of things and excite a generation and create these really, high aspirational goals for society, because quite frankly, Alberta needs it right now. What are all alternatives? We can wait for the oil and gas sector to recover from maybe tourism. No, it's time for the tech sector to step up. It's time for Alberta to increase its expectations of the sector. And it's time for us to behave as a community in doing that, because the odds of a company succeeding as a community are much higher than sitting in our basement, even with the Zoom world that we live in.
Yeah, it really is important for that voice to get out there, and for people that are, I hesitate to say this, my family, for example, who just, they don't have any idea what I do for the most part. They know I go to work, and they know that I work with technology, but they are representative of the people in the province, and we need to start opening that door, so it's not just this little box that we talk about, but they have no idea it exists, really. Yeah.
So let's get out and tell the story, and let's move on and do it, and let's set our bar really, really high. And let's use, again, organizations I work with, are like Tech Edmonton. I sit on Capital Roads for doing the venture communities. I sit on the A100s, as a member, things like that. Let's make sure that we align them with really aspirational goals, and make sure that every dollar that we spend on that is driving a bigger vision than one company at a time.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I truly appreciate it.
Well, anytime. Take care.